The transportation and logistics industry has its own set of challenges. In the hot seat, industry thought leaders take on M&A and what's driving the future of transportation and logistics. Are you ready for the hot seat?
Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. With me today, some might call him an industry legend, but one thing he's never short of are some hot opinions on what's going on in our industry. With me, I've got John Larkin, Senior Partner of Venture 53 and also Strategic Advisor at Clarendon Capital. John, welcome to the Hot Seat.
It's a pleasure to be here, Spencer. I always enjoy chatting with you.
Yes, sir. And there's a lot to talk about here. So before we heat things up a little bit, John, why don't you just take 20, 30 seconds, kind of give us a high-level overview at the work that you're doing at Venture 53 and Clarendon Capital.
Well, at Venture 53, we are actively involved in raising Fund 3. Funds 1 and Fund 2 are fully invested. Just had an exit in Fund 2, which was quite a nice one, I might add. So that is progressing along as well or better than expected. And Clarendon Capital, I believe, has 7 portfolio companies in its Fund 1, and I serve on the board of 2 of those portfolio companies, and I'm hopeful that an 8th company will be joining soon, which I was able to discover through a lot of hard work over the last 3 years or so. But in any event, staying busy with those 2 things, as well as advising many other companies and serving on quite a few other boards of directors, all in the transportation logistics industry, of course.
Yes, sir. All right, well, let me jump right in there. Let's get political here. You were on a panel here a month or 2 ago. This is at the Truckload Carriers Association at their refrigerated meeting. And I'm going to read you a comment that was in Transport Topics that kind of came out of that recap. And you were quoted as saying the political winds have shifted in the last 18 months or so. This was kind of like talking about a potential catalyst for growth in this space. And you said the political winds have shifted in the last 18 months or so pretty dramatically in the right direction. So my question is, do you still believe that, and why?
Yeah, it's always difficult to find the right words to describe the political environment, but obviously last November there was an election, and the country pretty overwhelmingly voted to elect Donald Trump as the 47th president. Along with that came a small majority in the House and a small majority in the Senate, which seemed to indicate that there was a feeling that we needed more pro-business policies, perhaps more attractive tax policy, perhaps more pro-American trade policies, and those sorts of things. And here we are, I don't know, 10 or 11 months later, and quite a bit has been accomplished. Most of the tariffs are in place. That's generating a huge amount of income for the U.S. government, reducing the deficit quite dramatically. That's a positive. Interest rates have started to come down. That's really not a political move, although there has been some political pressure on the Fed to take rates down. And the big, beautiful bill does include a number of very positive things for business, not the least of which is 100% depreciation on capital purchases for textbook purposes, which is a big incentive for people to spend money on capital goods. Also in there is an interesting element of the tax code, which has been expanded from the Build Back Better plan, which was passed under Joe Biden's presidency, which enables investors in earlier stage, smaller company, C Corps, if they hold their investment for 5 years or more, and that investment was made after July 4th, 2025, the first 15x of their return is capital gains tax free. It was 10x a return would be capital gains tax free, but they shifted that to 15x. That's a huge incentive for venture capitalists and private equity firms to make investments in smaller companies. That hasn't received a lot of press, but I think it's a huge positive for
Now,
America. And then the only last thing I was going to say had to do with sort of regulations. The whole, EV, we'll be 100% EV ready by 2030. That stuff has been repealed. That didn't seem like a realistic goal anyway. And some of the more restrictive policies on the trucking industry from an environmental point of view have been relaxed. And here recently, there's been a real focus on eliminating some of the non-domiciled CDL holders from the rolls. The estimate is there's 200,000 of them out there, which may be the reason why capacity has held on as we move 3.5 years into the longest and probably most painful freight recession of all time here. So, the administration seems to be doing a lot of positive things for the economy and a lot of positive things for the trucking industry in particular.
yeah. So when do you think? Because on paper, I think many folks in our industry would agree wholeheartedly with that. But I think that it takes a little time to actually, for those decisions and for those regulatory or political impacts to actually hit P&Ls of companies. And there's tremendous amount of stress right now. A lot of it's tariff related. So when do you see folks benefiting, the operators, from the policies that you've just laid out?
Yeah, well, for 3 straight years, the pundits have been saying that in the second quarter of next year, things will get better. And that would be kind of, my knee-jerk reaction is just to echo that and say, well, in the second quarter of 2026, some capacity will have exited, demand should be a little stronger, supply and demand should be tighter, rates should be moving up. But, having watched the last 3 years unfold, it's very possible that things won't get a whole lot better in 26, and it may be as late as sometime in 27 before we really see these policies really kick into full gear and have a positive effect on the industry.
Yeah.
That will have put us into a 4 or 5 year freight recession, which is absolutely unprecedented and very, very painful, especially when you see the headline GDP growth numbers coming in at 3.8% for the second quarter and projected at 3.9% for the third quarter of this year. Sure doesn't feel like that if you're in the trucking business.
No, 100%. So, you mentioned, some of the benefits of these policies to investors. So I'm going to ask you to put one of your many hats on, that being, an investor and an advisor at Clarendon Capital. You guys have a dedicated fund. You got to put that to work. How do you navigate being a disciplined investor when there is a tremendous amount of disruption and uncertainty in the transportation logistics space right now?
Yeah, Clarendon has a very unique strategy, Spencer, and the strategy is, number one, for platform investments, not to participate in auctions, which is probably not music to your ears, given the business that you're in, but to develop relationships with companies who are interested in partnering with Clarendon to accelerate the rate at which they are creating value in their company. We tend to not really pay peak multiples for peak earnings. We tend to pay reasonable multiples for stable average earnings, let's say. And that formula has worked quite well. We also ask the founders slash the management teams to roll forward equity to literally become our partners. And we try to work hand in glove with management over the next 5 years, plus or minus a year or two, to really create somewhere between, say, 3 and 6 times the value of the company at the time of the original investment.
So maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit more for those that are not familiar with roll forward equity and the role that it plays in many transactions with private equity. So maybe I'll ask the question like this: to what degree has aligning interest with the owners that are rolling with you in these transactions, to what degree has that played or influenced the success of the ultimate investment?
I think it plays a huge role. We're happy to have management slash ownership take a bite of the apple up front, but would like to see them roll forward a significant part of their equity ownership with the idea that over 5 years, that investment that they roll forward could be worth 4 or 5 times what it might be worth if they took it off the table today. So, we often tell folks, if you're interested in selling 100% of your equity and just leaving the industry altogether, you're probably better off hiring an investment bank or an advisor, like a Tenny Group, for example, to conduct an auction in a professional manner for you. That'll get you the best valuation today. But if you're interested in creating the most value over your total ownership period, the Clarendon alternative often is the best answer.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about this, and I think this is it's a great fit for folks that still have a lot of creativity and a lot of gas left in the tank. They feel like they can contribute. They just need a partner to help activate many of the things that they have already envisioned. They just need a partner to go execute, and that can help them become a more sophisticated operation. And so I really appreciate the way that you guys approach that, and congrats on your successes. Which brings me to my next recent announcement. One of your portfolio companies, Allstate's World Cargo, doing very well. Had a recent bolt-on acquisition of Red Arrow Logistics here back in July, and so great success there. And I also think that was it Kendra Tanner that was recently acknowledged as Woman of the Year in Logistics. Is that correct?
I think she won some sort of an award. I'm not sure the exact name of the award.
Well, either way, there's some good things happening there. So I guess my question to you, John, is that how do you define success as an investor? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to think about that. You've been doing this for a long time. What is the definition of success as you invest in T&L companies?
Yeah, at the end of the day, success comes with the exit. When your investment dollars are returned along with a return on top of that. And I think in the private equity world, you're looking for at least a 3x return. If you put $1 million in, you'd like to get $3 million out 5 years later. If not, 5 or 6 million out in 5 years. So that's really what defines success. Failure would be a company that gets mired in the mud, can't get out of its way, has difficulty connecting with the marketplace, can't really grow effectively, can't really remain as profitable perhaps as it once was. Those are company, it's not like we don't have some of those companies in the portfolio, And those companies generally take a lot of the resources that Clarendon has to offer to work with management to try and get them moving in the right direction. So we are not, at Clarendon at least, passive investors. We have board seats, usually control majority of the board, probably interact with management, on a weekly basis, if not on a daily basis. So we're really part of the team trying to get those companies moving in the right direction to maximize shareholder value. We do have a fiduciary responsibility to our limited partners to do that, and we take that responsibility very seriously.
No, very, very good. I'm going to transition here a little bit. You were recently part of a roundtable, your industry peers, Avery Wise, Lee Glasgow, and talking about just a myriad of different issues. I'm sure this was a fun conversation, but one of the things that kind of caught my attention here was something that a lot of our audience is pretty sensitive to, is just what's going to happen in peak season coming up here in 2025. And so I'm going to read you one of your comments here, and like for you to kind of respond to that. But one of your comments was that the tariff seesaw has created a lot of angst for shippers, carriers, 3PLs, suppliers, everyone involved in the supply chain. However, as tariff deals are finalized with more and more of our trading partners, as the big beautiful bill is signed into law, the Fed ratchets rates down and the regulations are loosened, supply and demand should tighten. As uncertainty around the tariffs diminishes, the trucking environment should improve, and the 2025 peak season could be robust. So that's a little positivity. How are you feeling about the current condition right now in peak season?
Yeah, that was a roundtable that took place probably, I want to say, in the March timeframe.
I think it was July is what I think I had in here.
It was published in July, but I think
okay.
I think the actual conversation was a couple of months earlier than that. I think that was, in retrospect, probably too optimistic, Spencer. And while many of the things, as we talked about initially here in this conversation, turned out to be true and actually occurred, there is a lag effect, which was sort of the point of your question there. And it doesn't seem to be creating a whole lot of incremental demand, nor does it seem to be shedding a whole lot of incremental capacity right at the moment. So I think all bets are off for a robust peak season in 2025. And the earliest we can hope for that is 26, and it may be 50-50 proposition that it could be as late as 2027.
Well, like you, John, I think I've said over the last 3 years, the next quarter it's going to get better. The next quarter it's going to get better. But I appreciate we have enough negativity, even if it's not batting 1,000. I do appreciate some optimism along the way. Now, one thing that I just having visited with you for years, I do believe that you're very optimistic about the future of this space and some of the innovation, some of the technology, and some of the things that are happening here. So let's kind of move in that direction. Over the next 5 years, what is our trucking space going to look like? How is it going to be different?
Well, I was once accused by an institutional salesman of being a perma bull. And I always kind of thought my role as a sell-side analyst was to be a cheerleader for the trucking industry. So I do tend to be more optimistic than pessimistic when being asked these sorts of questions. But I think the next 5 years are pretty, really set up a pretty robust landscape for the trucking industry for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think the tariffs, which aren't going away anytime soon, have instigated a huge amount of direct foreign investment in the United States. Hundreds of billions of dollars from foreign companies hundreds of billions from U.S. companies that previously had been focusing their investment on foreign countries are now coming back to the U.S. That's going to generate a huge amount of construction activity. It's going to generate a huge amount of manufacturing activity, all of which should be good for trucking, because when you manufacture here in the U.S., you're not just handling that finished product from the port of LA or the port of Long Beach to the consumer. You're handling the raw materials, the semi-finished materials, the finished materials, the components, the sub-assemblies, the finished product. You get to touch the freight, 8 or 10 times instead of once or twice. So that should be a huge shot in the arm for the trucking industry. The trucking industry is going to have to use technology more intelligently and more aggressively than it has historically in order to overcome what I'll call the labor shortage, particularly after the FMCSA cracks down on some of these non-domiciled CDL drivers and others that shouldn't be hauling freight within the U.S. And what's going to help with that? I would say autonomous vehicles certainly will help. People keep saying, "Oh, that'll never happen," blah blah blah. Autonomous vehicles don't work. Well, I've had the good fortune to be an advisor to Aurora Innovation, which is one of the leaders in the autonomous truck space. And the technology is really spectacular. They are operating in the state of Texas in revenue service. They're about to extend their Fort Worth to El Paso route out to Phoenix. And, these autonomous vehicles don't need to take mandatory rest breaks. They don't need to take mandatory sleep breaks. They don't need to use the restroom. They don't need to stop for dinner. They just keep rolling. And that creates a huge amount of productivity and a lot of capacity that really will be necessary with all this manufacturing coming back to the States, which, again, is helped by the tariffs, which makes it economical to manufacture in the U.S. But at the same time, we have the emergence of robotics here in the U.S., and those robots don't really care whether they're in Cleveland or Shenzhen. They don't need a smoke break. They don't need to go home to their family at night. They can just keep producing no matter where they are. And I think that's why the future of trucking is so bright. I also think we are now beginning to see some optimization tools emerge. Companies like Optimal Dynamics, companies like Optum, companies like Hoptech, all have some amazing tools which can make existing capacity more productive and more efficient, with the general notion of driving higher revenue per tractor per week, which effectively, these systems effectively allow you to trade off rate per mile, empty miles, and utilization within the constraints of hours of service rules and so forth, which of course don't come into play when you're running autonomous vehicles. So I think the future here is bright. The industry is going to be more efficient going forward. And that doesn't necessarily mean that only the big companies will be successful. I think with the help of the newly enlarged brokerage industry and all the technology they are harnessing, that small companies can really link into these brokers to effectively use the brokers as their sales and marketing arm effectively. So you don't need to be big to be effective here going forward. But the future is certainly bright in my opinion.
Well, you mentioned several companies there. I think it's really fascinating. You mentioned on the robotics. That's just kind of things that didn't really seem real until recently, and obviously you're you know, seeing this activated across the country. I'm curious, what are some robotics focused companies that you think our audience should have our eye on? Folks that are doing really interesting things in the T&L space.
Well, in the T&L space, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, certainly you have companies like Aurora, you have Kodiak, which I think just listed
To
as
go
a
public.
public company by way of a SPAC, if I'm not mistaken. There's one that I happen to have an investment in called Gatic, which just had a big splash with a company up in Canada. They're going to run 50 autonomous trucks. These are trucks that tend to operate in urban areas, moving freight over the same route repeatedly day after day, usually from a DC to a store without a driver. Once that truck learns the route, it can be cut loose by itself on that route. That's a little bit different than Kodiak and Aurora, which are basically running point to point on long stretches of rural interstate, which is a different problem to solve than the problem of interacting with all the traffic you might encounter in an urban area. So those are some of the top companies that are going to really help the trucking industry become more efficient. There are quite a few large truckload carriers that are experimenting with these various autonomous solutions, and I think we're going to see 5 years from now, who knows, maybe as much as 10% of some big companies' line haul miles being provided with autonomous vehicles. Could
No,
even be more
I
than
don't
that.
disagree. One of my questions is, what's your take on how this will impact the insurance market, specifically P&C products?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think these autonomous systems are fundamentally safer than your best human driver.
I think our culture is accepting that based on how dangerous we're becoming on the road. I think that's becoming less, we're getting less pushback on anxiety around that.
Yeah, but the problem is you can't go from 100% human operated vehicles to 100% autonomous vehicles. There's going to be like a 30 or 40 or 50-year transition period here. And, the autonomous vehicle can't necessarily deal any better with the guy who just, consumed a couple of six packs, pulls out in his F-150 in front of the autonomous vehicle. The autonomous vehicle obviously can try to avoid that truck, but there's only so much you can do there.
Right.
There's still going to be crazy people on the road. So, who's going to be responsible for the accident or the fatality which takes place there? Is it going to be the provider of the technology? Is it going to be the trucking company? Is it going to be a leasing company? Who is going to be taking the risk of operating autonomous vehicles? And I think a lot of that still has to be sorted out with the insurance industry and with the providers of this technology.
Yeah. Now you're a former rail guy, and so I got to hear some of your insights on the potential mega mergers within the rail space. I'm sure you know a lot of the parties well that are involved here. Maybe in just a quick summary, how transformational, if the Surface Transportation Board approves this, how transformational could this transaction be?
Well, we're talking about the UP Norfolk Southern combination, which, as you point out, the STB has to approve. The one member of the STB who was sort of anti-merger was just fired by Donald Trump. So that may take care of that problem. sort of interesting situation there. But you clearly don't need two CEOs, you don't need two CFOs, you don't need two accounting departments, you don't need two marketing departments. So there's a lot of overhead reduction that is possible with a combination like this. There's also a lot of friction in transcontinental moves that is eliminated. You're going to see transcontinental intermodal become more fluid and more efficient. The on the street transfers that occur in Chicago today could be a thing of the past with these transcontinental mergers, which would be good to see. It might reduce the congestion in Chicago a little bit, although some of the draymen that participate in that may be disappointed. And there's a certain amount of freight in the middle 20% of the United States that doesn't move by rail, because when you have two major railroads in the east and two major railroads in the west, on those shorter haul moves, one of the two parties that is interchanging the traffic gets such a small slice of the revenue that it's not worth their trouble to engage in that activity. But if the combined railroad gets 100% of the revenue, then it's possible that some of the over-the-road traffic that moves up and down the Mississippi River Valley, plus or minus a couple of 100 miles, could move over to the railroads now that one railroad would have access to 100% of the revenue instead of having to split it with another partner. So there's quite a few benefits. Interestingly, a lot of the parties who I thought might be opposed to the merger are coming out in favor of the merger, most notably the unions, who have been more or less guaranteed their positions, as I understand it. So that's a little bit surprising. The only people that are complaining generally are the shippers, i.e. the customers, who are fearful that rates are going to go up, there'll be less competition, and they'll end up service and higher pricing. So we'll have to wait and see how that all pans out. I think the shippers might be surprised at how much better the service can be. And if the STB does its job, then pricing should be held somewhat in check at reasonable levels, even after a merger. Now, just yesterday, I believe it was, the very fine CEO of CSX left the company under what appears to be pressure coming from an activist shareholder group that has a big position in CSX, because CSX had said, "Hey, we're good as we are. Mm-hmm. We'll do a collaborative effort with the BNSF, but we don't need to merge with BNSF." The activist shareholder thought they should merge with somebody, either the BNSF or the CP KCS, which was a big merger that just occurred here fairly recently. So the new CEO who came in from outside the industry has effectuated a big merger. They thought he had good experience in that regard. So it's very possible now that CSX is in play. Stock rose 5 or 6% yesterday, I noticed. And, wouldn't be surprised if, Warren Buffett and his team there at Berkshire Hathaway sharpens their pencils to see what might be possible to put together a second transcontinental railroad.
I'm always a little skeptical of the comments out of Berkshire Hathaway. It always feels like there's some posturing going on. We'll see. We'll see. But no, I think that's fascinating. One more question, and then a little bit of a wild card for you, sir. So we talked about the next 5 years. you know, assuming this goes through with Union Pacific, what other sectors within transportation and logistics do you feel are ripe for some type of large consolidation or transformational type transaction?
Well, the various sectors of the industry are interesting to study in that regard. The truckload industry is still here, 45 years after deregulation, still pretty fragmented. The biggest carriers, the Schneiders, the Knight-Swifts of the world, may have 1% of the overall market, maybe at most 2%.
Right.
So it always seems to me that there's room for consolidation in the truckload industry. Knight-Swift was doing quite a job of that until they pivoted and started building out a national LTL network, presumably concluding that the LTL industry was a fundamentally better industry. I think a lot of people think the LTL industry is more asset intensive, but per dollar of revenue, it's not more asset intensive because there's so much more revenue on every truck because of the multiple shipments on every truck,
Right.
which are smaller and higher priced. So I think there's probably still room for some combinations in those network-based businesses where density really matters, and there's an opportunity to become even more efficient, push those load factors up towards 100%, push those terminal capacities up towards 100%. There's just a huge amount of efficiency to be had there in the LTL industry. Whether anybody wants to bite off a combination of size, who knows? It seems like the big privately held companies out there like R&L and Estes, Southeastern, those companies are doing so well that there's really no incentive to have to merge with somebody, although there are some pretty compelling synergies. The truckload industry, combinations are so difficult because the cultures are different, driver pay scales are different, equipment specs are different, customer bases are different. It's always very painful to try and pull off a merger. So I don't see any big incentive for people to try and combine companies in the truckload sector either. In the logistics industry, the asset light 3PL industry, it's where you may see more combinations taking place. Those mergers seem to be easier to pull off. They're less risky, and there are some economies of scale there, especially when it comes to technology applications. So I could see C.H. Robinson being acquisitive. I could see TQL being acquisitive. TQL, for the first time ever, has a corporate development guy who happens to be my former partner
Yeah.
at Stifel, who is a terrific guy, very well plugged into the industry. I could see Echo combining with somebody else once Jordan decides to sell that. So that would be where I would concentrate my focus if I was looking for big time combinations.
Interesting. All right, sir. We're going to wrap up a little wild card. Now, when we were prepping for this, I was kind of like, hey, what do we want to focus on? You said, I can talk about anything. We can talk about this, we can talk about music. So let's talk about a little music. I'm asking you, John, if you had to put a couple songs on a trucking soundtrack for 2025, what would be some of those title tracks that would accurately describe or maybe kind of sum up what we're experiencing right now? What could be some of those songs?
Okay, so I'm gonna show my age here a little bit.
All right.
My two favorite bands of all time are probably Chicago and the Beach Boys.
Okay.
Okay, Brian Wilson, rest in peace. One of the most creative producers of all time. But when I think of Chicago, I think of feeling stronger every day,
Yeah.
and I think that
That's
that's
a
a
good one.
good song for the trucking industry to get behind here over the next couple of years, because I think things can't get a whole lot worse, but they can get a whole lot better.
There we go.
So we should be feeling stronger every day going forward. And then, as a Beach Boys song, boy, that's a tough one. But maybe God only knows. God only knows what the future is going to look like, and when
Yeah, you finish the sentence. God only knows. You finish the sentence.
this darn freight recession is going to end.
Well, I love it. That is a good note for us to end this interview, sir. Hey, listen, so many good thoughts and things for our audience to think about. I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Folks, if you're not already following John on LinkedIn, you need to do so. It's a good follow, always good insights. That's going to do it for us here in the hot seat, John. We will see you next time.
Thanks, Spencer.